Electronics company Reunert has a market cap of nearly 15 billion rand and owns Nashua Mobile, CBI and African Cables. Reunert was established in 1888 and first listed on the JSE in 1948. Reunert has a price-to-earnings ratio of 11.7 and a dividend yield of 4.6%. So in terms of longevity, this company has been around for a long time.
Yeah, and as in the case with many of these industrial assets that have been around a long time, they've kind of moved from one group to another and they've been consolidated. They've acquired different pieces. At one point they had a close working association. They bought Grinica Electronics and that's part of it. Nokia Siemens Networks was another piece that's gone. The group currently, though, is centered around the Nashua and Nashua Mobile businesses. Obviously, Nashua Mobile has done very well. But really why we're talking about them here is what's called the CBI division, which is Circuit Breaker. The CB, that's what that stands for, Circuit Breaker Industries. And that includes two businesses that make cables. One is called African Cables, which is mostly the heavier duty copper-based cables that you see on those big wooden rolling things. And then they've got a joint venture called ATC Aberdare, which is in the manufacture of fiber optic cables, which is obviously big right now because everyone's pulling these networks. But in any event, the group itself's been a bit dull over the years, but on the whole looks as though it's sort of gathering a bit of momentum lately.
And Craig, from the share price graph to you, it looks as though the share price is also gathering momentum.
Yeah, look, one can see that in the sector as a whole. And you're seeing it here. Obviously, some of the divisions have gone through a bit of difficult times, but there's a lot of interesting growth prospects. We're talking mainly cable at the moment, and you've seen them focus on maintenance at municipalities. Their telecommunication side of the cable perhaps wasn't so good as it has been in the past, but still pretty good growth. And what I like about the group as a whole is they've been pretty consistent. Even in the last 4 or 5 years, which have been difficult times, consistent in maintaining good margins. So the last 2 years, we've seen over 12% margins, 12.2 last. Yeah, it's a really strong management and very nice diversified group. The second largest cable producer in the country.
Well, if you're going to go for electrical cables, you may go for, or may as well go for the second largest producer in the country.
Look, CBI is the market leader not only in cables but also in electrical switches and that kind of thing, you know, the little stuff that gets screwed by an electrician into the distribution board. So now the question for me becomes, you know, can they really sustain fat margins relative to their import competition? Because, of course, we're not the only ones who make this stuff. Everybody does, particularly the Asians. So it becomes a question of, you know, are the margins good enough? I wouldn't be buying Reunert particularly for this particular asset. I'd be buying them for the Nashua Mobile asset. Interestingly, Nashua Mobile is the only of the remaining independent distributors that significantly involves itself with both Vodacom and MTN business. All the other guys that were tied to one network got acquired by the networks. So I don't know. I mean, they've got a nice installed base, and as you know, I'm a big fan of the mobile telephony whole thing.
Craig, is Nashua Mobile the star or the jewel in the crown here?
Look, I think it's near the end of the growth cycle, is my opinion, and I've got a very similar view in terms of Waterpage in the Altron group. But there's still growth to come, so it is still an interesting story. But I don't want to underestimate the cables, which is what we're talking about. What I also like in the group is Reunert, because they've got a foray into military equipment and they see a lot of growth opportunities, and in fact saw good growth out of the last set of results there as well. So there are some very good, interesting growth prospects in the division as a whole. Coming back to the CBI on the circuit breakers, there I think is actually also a bit of decline, because it's what they traditionally called Samite breakers. A lot of the competition have produced DIN rail breakers, which is a lot cheaper. So most of CBI's production on the South African market is largely a replacement of existing circuit boards that are there. It seems like new developments are not using that to the extent that it was, so there's been a bit of decline, but the cable side has still been growing nicely.
You want to make one more point there, Paul?
Yeah, there's two things that have happened to them of interest in the last year and a half, just to add onto the list. One is that Bull Pretorius eventually retired and was replaced by a guy called Nick Wenzel, who lasted less than a year before he was booted out by the board. He's a good guy and has resurfaced at Premier Foods. But he's now been replaced by an internal candidate, Dave Rawlinson, who was the old financial director. So I don't know what that tells you, but it tells you about the power relationship between the board and the executives. The other thing is they bought a business called ECN, which is one of those kind of switching network type people that route your calls and so on, for about 170 million rand, only to have the guy who sold it to them walk out the next day and start a business which operates in the same space called AppChat. So he wanted to bullet the old sort of telecos business and go into the iPhone app thing. So now they're trying to sue him. So these kinds of corporate misadventures, I'm not sure really reflect well on you or not, but there you are, there they are.
Craig, defend your position on Reunert here.
Yeah, look, so I think what it is on a longer term call with a recovery in construction. I
so
see
hot or not?
opportunity
Tell me, is it hot or not?
military on Raytech and the various things that prospects there in the pipeline. Of course, a lot of what we're talking about now is dependent on government expenditure, and we've had promises, but we haven't quite seen that infrastructure spend come through. But on the auspices that we will see that coming through, certainly prior to elections, then I would say hot.
Paul? Hot or not on Reunert?
No, I've never been a real big fan of the diversified industrial model, and I think this group ought to be doing better. So in a world of choices, I'm going to go with other stocks, so not hot.